I'm delighted to be joined by Kyle from Brand of Sacrifice. Mate, second record. How much did you put on this album when it comes to pressure? Because it felt like less a case of there being pressure on this album and more there was so much rise in profile in 2019 and 2020. It must feel good that there's a whole bunch of people baying for Life's Blood.
Yeah, it definitely feels great, but we certainly felt the pressure, especially with things like deadlines. But personally, I had a little bit of a writer's block at one point, and we had to overcome that. And eventually we did, and everything was smooth sailing from there. But yeah, overall, it was a good experience. I think we learned a lot, specifically when it comes to touring, on how we wanted the record to go. You know, learning things like how crowd reactions are going to be for certain riffs or certain sections and things like that, and what type of sounds we were doing that may not have translated as well in a live setting. So we kind of thought about those things a little bit more, and trying to make things a little more catchy overall and applicable to a wider audience while still being brutal and heavy at the same time, and still taking the listener for a ride. So that was really the overall goal.
And it's interesting that we go straight down that particular rabbit hole, because one of the things that stands out about this record is its change of experimentation. And when you had such a successful record last time out, and I'll ask you a bit more about the way that people reacted to those songs live and how it impacted the writing for this record, but it's bold to be trying as much different as you're trying on this record, particularly in terms of those kind of choir effects that we've heard on the title track at this point in time.
Yeah.
How important was it for you to mix it up? Because when you've had a successful record and you've been a breakthrough band, I guess there's a lot of temptation to just continue with the thing that worked. But that doesn't seem to be the Brand of Sacrifice way.
Yeah, I think we kind of honestly write music that we would want to listen to. We keep in mind things that, you know, will move the band in a forward trajectory, but we also kind of looked at the toolkit, the Boss toolkit from the past, and maybe discarded a few of those tools and then really sharpened the others. I think that was honestly something that was really important with this record, but we weren't afraid to experiment with. I think there's one thing that I emphasize a lot is that we really raised the volume of the electronics and the synths and the keys in the mix overall. I definitely wanted to showcase those things a little more, because I think that is something that's really important to the Boss sound overall, and we kind of doubled down on it on this record, I think. Overall, so.
I like it. I'm glad that you have.
Thank you, man.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, man. Like, it's
no, it's okay.
the thing that stands out about doing the synth thing is we're kind of in a third wave of, like, do you see, before I get into this, do you see deathcore as a dirty word? Because some bands, when I use the word deathcore, are like, we don't want anything to do with that, and other bands are like, fuck yeah, that's what we are. Where does Brand of Sacrifice sit on that?
I think honestly, the listeners and the fans dictate how that goes. It's not up to the bands to say, you know what, I think my music is this or that.
Right.
We're deathcore, and we've embraced that. I don't think that's a dirty word personally. I think it's a great word, and I think deathcore is really on the rise again overall. So
I totally agree, and it's almost like we're in a third wave at this point in time. Like,
yeah.
Fucking hell! Like, I reviewed Genesis by Job for a Cowboy when it came out for Kerrang magazine, right?
Okay.
Like, so when it fucking blew in the first place was one thing. Then, like, I guess Thy Art have been the big story of the last sort of 5-6 years. But it feels like with yourselves and Shadow of Intent and Angel Maker and all these kind of bands that are not only carrying the torch forward, but bringing their own sounds to the scene. Was that part of upping the synths and upping the choral stuff in the mix and giving yourself a bit more personality within the third wave of deathcore? Because I know I can listen to Lifeblood and get something there that I can't necessarily get elsewhere, or certainly not in abundance.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think if you mentioned like Shadow of Intent and Angel Maker, they have sort of their own stylistic choices as well. Where Angel
Yeah.
Maker, they have sort of a nostalgic approach to deathcore, but they put a modern spin on it, which I really like. And they got the whole dual vocalist thing. Both of those vocalists are incredible, great guys as well. And Shadow of Intent has got the symphonic stuff, but it's a little bit of a different approach to what we do. We kind of sort of implement modern synth sounds and things like that, not just choirs and things like that. So I think there's a different approach overall for all three bands if you were just to pick those out of a hat.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we definitely wanted to kind of separate ourselves a little more too. And I think we've sort of taken, in some ways, a metalcore approach to deathcore, especially with the repeated choruses and things like that. So that's something we also kind of discussed and wanted to move towards as well. So
Yeah.
maybe we could steal a few listeners from the metalcore scene as well, as show them that deathcore is not so bad, you know? So
Yeah. Like, that's fascinating to me, because I agree. Because where Shadow of Intent, I kind of go to that more Dimmu Borgir style, classic, like almost gothic at times, with those like massive strings and things like that. What are the electronic bands and the electronic influences that make its way into Brand of Sacrifice then? You know, we're Knotfest and we talk about rock and metal here, so people might like what they hear in Brand of Sacrifice and not know where to go for it next. What sort of electronic influences make its way into Brand of Sacrifice?
I think a lot of it has to do with video game soundtracks.
Is it a Mick Gordon thing?
I think there's a little bit of Mick Gordon in there. If I think some people may have noticed that, but we've got that. Anime soundtracks as well. Just video game culture. We kind of looked at Halo a little bit too. But Michael also, he's the writer and producer of Brand Sacrifice. He's in the chat actually. Leo Sacrifice there, and he has different influences from different genres as well. Like he's dabbled in EDM and dubstep and things like that too. So he's got some experience with those type of genres as well. So that has sort of spilled over a little bit, I think, in my opinion. So
anime's fascinating to me, Carl. Like I got into anime over Christmas. That's how new to it. Do you know what it was? It was someone showed me Demon Slayer, and I loved the art of it. But then I saw Jujutsu Kaisen afterwards that has that same art style but is a bit gnarlier. And something that has stood out to me while delving into anime is one of the few mainstream pop culture propositions where you regularly hear metal. Like, you regularly hear distorted guitars, not just in the intro music, in combat sequences, in all of that kind of thing. Do you feel like there's a real, almost an untapped, like, relationship between anime and metal?
I think there certainly is. Many people in the chat may not know this, but our band is based off of a manga/anime called Berserk. It's one of my favorites of all time. And I think the source material is extremely dark and menacing and bleak. And I've always considered that particular story the death metal of anime or manga, if you will. So I think that's something I've realized for a long time. And there's a correlation as far as metal fans and anime fans go too. It's often hand in hand. So we've seen a lot of people understanding the references that we put out, whether it's song titles or lyrics and things like that. And I think that they definitely go hand in hand, no doubt.
Do you only tie things to Berserk, or do you tie things to other parts of anime, other shows, other laws?
Not at the moment. It's strictly Berserk related. In the future, we may go away from that. We're not sure yet, but for as far as Brand of Sacrifice goes, that's strictly Berserk related material.
So when you mentioned writer's block earlier on, Was that to do with lyrics, or was that as a band?
No, Michael Leo is an absolute machine. I don't know how he is the way he is, but he can continuously write. He has this crazy process where he goes in the shower and thinks of riffs and things like that. Hopefully,
The
I'm not
hustle, the
revealing too
hustle
much,
never
but-
stops.
And yeah, for me, I have a very weird process where I sort of do things a little bit backwards. So usually, a lot of people that I know, they're vocalists, they'll write some lyrics, then they'll try and think of some patterns, and then maybe modify the lyrics, and then go in the studio, maybe do a pre-pro, and then finalize the recording on the final recording in the studio when you're recording the album or the EP, whatever that might be. But I open my digital audio workstation up first. I write a couple lines and I track them right away. So some of the songs on the record are literally, it was from point A to point B, tracking the whole song, and that's what you got at that point. So sometimes that's awesome because I can knock out a song with all the vocal layers and takes in like 5 hours. And other times I get stuck and I do like 30 seconds of the song, then I come back to it a couple months later and finish it up. But so it's kind of hit and miss in some ways, but that's been my process for years now. It's a little odd, but that works for me. So
No, is that full blown DIY? Like you track your vocals at home, just fucking and go. I love that shit. I love that. And is that what we hear on the record? Because
yes,
your album's fucking phenomenally produced as well. Like the sonic power of things is fucking really, really stands out.
I gotta thank Leo for that one. That's all him.
While we're on that subject, and you mentioned it earlier on that you feel like deathcore's on a resurgence, and so do I. Do you think that is to do with a strong scene? Because it's one thing. Like I'll level with you. It was Shadow of Intent that I heard first, and was like, wow, fuck, that's the first thing I've heard in deathcore for ages that's really blown my skirt up. And then came like the other bands at the same time. Yourselves and Angel Maker are the two that I always shout out, but there's more than that. Does it feel like a scene resurgence more? And how does that help a band like yourself that's in the middle of breaking through? It must feel good that there are other bands, and also that those other bands don't sound like one another.
I think it's great. As far as the scene goes, there's a ton of incredible deathcore bands that are doing it. Many we've toured with, like Rings of Saturn and Enterprise Earth.
Yes, Enterprise Earth. Even they did a fucking acoustic thing as well. They're another band doing something totally out there.
Trying different things, and I think it's vital if you want to move things forward as a whole, to try different things a little bit outside the box instead of just the chugging and the fret ones and the brutal vocals. I think people are longing for something that stands out and is just a little bit different from what we're used to. So I think that there's definitely a scene resurgence. I think that the fans are incredibly devoted, and this band wouldn't be where it is without the fans and without the supporters. So I'm extremely humbled and thankful for that overall. I think it's awesome because prior to everything going on with the virus here, I usually am the one that does merch for most of the night, and I find it extremely rewarding to be able to talk to people firsthand and experience what it means to them to be a part of the atmosphere of a show and experience the music and how it's impacted them in their daily lives and things like that. I find that extremely rewarding. So I'm very thankful for that, and I'm longing for shows to return, of course. But I think it's been extremely powered by the fans, and they're extremely devout.
I agree for live music, especially for deathcore, man. Deathcore is not made for vibing on your sofa when you haven't left your house for 10 months. It's made for those live moments. What
Certainly.
was it when you said earlier that how people responded to material from the last record? What was it? Was there anything in particular that stood out that you were like, oh, that's a sweet spot for us in particular?
I think so. One of the most sort of, I don't want to say rushed, but quickly put together songs on the last record, it's called Charlotte. And it's a little more straightforward than some of the other songs. It's got a repeating chorus. It's got verses. It's got a bridge. We found that song to be incredibly liked overall, and that was one of the last songs I actually tracked on that record. And we were right at the deadline, and funny enough, I actually had blown my voice out at that point, just because I was working a full-time job at that time. It was the middle of winter, and I just had a cold as well, and I was tracking too much, and I blew my voice out, and I had no choice but to track that song, and we got it done still, even with a partially blown out voice. But
That's wild.
Yeah, so that song, Leo put it together pretty quickly, and then I did all the vocals in like 4 or 5 hours for that one, like struggling through it, and it ended up being one of the more popular songs off that record, and I think we kind of learned from that, and as well, like I mentioned before, just the crowd reaction to certain sections of songs and things like that, and kind of doubling down on those things.
It's always an interesting time to talk to a band just before people have heard their full record. But I can't imagine that. Is this more excitement than nerves getting ready to release this record? I love the last record, but this is such a clear step forward for the band. Is this more excitement than nerves, or how is it releasing a record, especially in the world and the way it is right now?
I'd say I was probably more nervous when we first put out Demon King, because I think although that one's a little more structured, it has a little bit less theatrics as far as synths and choirs and things like that, but it still uses the Boss toolkit. But as soon as that had a really good reaction, I was like, okay, I think they'll really like Lifeblood when that comes out now, and that also had a great response. So I'm excited to release everything, because those initial nerves have sort of vanished after those 2 songs coming out. So I think if people enjoy those, they'll definitely enjoy what else is to come. And I think there's a couple spins people might not expect towards the end of the record that they'll like as well, but I'm interested to see the reaction to those too.
Well, come back in March and we'll talk again when people have heard the record, and we can start talking about that more. I don't want to kind of spoil any surprises. Kyle, pleasure to have you here. The album Lifeblood is out in March. Brand of Sacrifice. Check out the singles Demon King and Lifeblood that are out now. Kyle, thanks so much for your time today, man.
Thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate it.
Fuck yeah, and we'll definitely have you back, come around the time of the March. I'll talk to yourself or Michael, that we can do another push for the record when it's out in March.
Cool.
All the best, Carl. Thanks so much, mate.
All right, you take care.
Cheers, man. Bye.